Good evening. As we begin tonight, I invite you to imagine that you are filling out a form and you have your name, your address, phone number, whatever it is, all the normal things. And you get down to a box that says religious affiliation. And you have the normal selections of Christian and Jewish and Muslim and Buddhist, and you scroll down and you get to the very end, and there's an option that says none. No religious affiliation. Well, that box, the none box, is the box that millions of Americans are checking now. And that none box tells a story of disappointment, of disaffiliation, of longing. But that's not the end of the story. And so tonight, I want us to talk about the nuns. That's not, as you can see on the screen, it's not N-U-N-S, not the Catholic nuns, but it's the nuns that check that box of no religious affiliation. I want to talk about them for lots of reasons, but one reason is because we are living through the biggest religious shift in the history of the United States of America. 28% of Americans now check that box that they are unaffiliated with any religion at all. They are the nuns. Especially young people, about half of Gen Z, defined as 18 to 29-year-olds, something like that, about half of them are nuns, check the box, as no religious affiliation at all. So many churches, and just institutions in general, are looking around and wondering, where is everybody, right? We still have people in the country, but we don't have people in the churches. They're the nuns. They're not here. As far as societal shifts go like this isn't a slow leak. This is a flood. This is a major exodus from church and other institutions. So tonight, and probably one more Sunday night, maybe next month, I want to ask this question about reaching the unreachables, loving the nuns like Jesus would. For tonight, I just want to set the stage, and next time we'll talk more practical, talk about maybe some action steps we can take. But tonight I want to talk about who the nuns are, and maybe why they haven't come back to the church, and maybe what that means for our society. So, just setting the stage tonight. But I want to begin in Luke chapter 15, verses 1 through 7. And this is on the screen. All of our texts for tonight will be on the screen. But I wanted to begin here because I think it's important to love the nuns like Jesus would, in order to do that, to hear his heart toward people like the nuns. So Luke 15, beginning in verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him. We might say loosely, these are the nuns of their culture. They're drawing near to hear Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes, these are the church people, grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. "What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance." Now, I think that last phrase might actually be some sarcasm from Jesus. It's 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. I think he's looking at these scribes and Pharisees and implying that they think that they need no repentance when we all do. So maybe some sarcasm on Jesus' part. But for me, what's interesting about this is that Jesus always seemed to notice the one person who wasn't at the table. If someone was missing, Jesus noticed. Jesus was the type of person who left the 99 sheep who were in the open country, and he left to find the one sheep. That was the heart of Jesus. And so I think if we're going to follow him, if we're going to love the nuns like Jesus would, then we have to learn to listen to and love on people who've left and people who've never arrived. So tonight, 3 sections for our discussion. The first one, who are the nuns? Really? Who are the nuns, really? And yeah, I picked a terrible color. There's technically there are some numbers beside each of those, the 4 boxes at the bottom. There's a 1, 2, 3, and 4, so we'll get to that in a moment. You can't see them at all because they're white, but I promise that there are numbers there, and I'll explain it in a moment. But I want to talk about who they are. And before I do that, I want to give a bit of a warning to myself and to you as we enter into this discussion, because it's really easy to group big groups of people into my categories that help me to understand the world, right? When I look out at people who are different from me, and if you're in this room, most likely you're not a nun. And so that most likely the people we're talking about are different from you and me. And so it's easy to categorize, to box them in to my categories that help me to understand them. Maybe help me not to feel as threatened by them. Maybe help me to look down on them, to feel better about myself, whatever it is. It's easy to do that. So I want to be careful about that. But I also think it's important to acknowledge that there are some similarities that are pretty prevalent in this group that we call the nuns. Generally speaking, about 70% of them are under 50 years old, so mostly younger people. About 74% of them grew up with religion of some sort, so about 3/4 of them grew up with religion. And about 60% of them identify as politically a bit more progressive, more on the progressive side. So some broad similarities, nothing too specific, but some broad similarities. But these 4 categories on the screen I think are important because they help us to group large groups of the nuns in together to help us understand where they're coming from. These 4 groups I didn't come up with. They're from Ryan Burge and Tony Jones, who are sociologists who study this kind of thing for a living. They did a big study recently, about 15,000 respondents, and it cost like $100,000. It's really expensive to do this kind of stuff. But they found about 4 major categories to break the nuns into. And those 4 are Ninos, nuns in name only on the screen, spiritual but not religious, the duns, and the zealous atheists. So let's break down each of these very quickly. First of all, the nuns in name only. These are about 21% of the nuns, so about 1 out of every 5 nuns is a Nino. And actually, they are fairly religious on a bunch of metrics, but they don't consider themselves to be religious people, that they're not affiliated with a religious group. These are people who attend a service, a religious service, maybe on Christmas or Easter. About a third of them attend a house of worship at least once a year. And about half of them pray every day. And almost that many believe in God without a doubt. So from those categories, you would think that they might be religious, but they don't consider themselves to be. So nuns in name only. The second category is spiritual but not religious. A while ago, I preached a sermon called A Home for the Spirit. And one of the things I talked about in that sermon is about how sometimes we in church can become religious but not spiritual. And that was a play on this category of people, that there are a lot of people. This is the biggest category of nuns. About 36% of them are spiritual but not religious. So this group, broadly speaking, is anti-institutional. They don't trust big institutions like the church. 93% describe their church attendance as seldom/never. Nearly 9 out of 10 say that they hardly ever pray. And they're very likely to believe in God, but they believe, the type of thing where they believe in a higher power. Maybe not a personal God, but they believe in a higher power. About 3/4 of the spiritual but not religious group say that they trust religion not at all. The quote, unquote, around not at all. New Age, these are New Age spiritualists who explore spirituality through things like crystals and nature walks and yoga, that kind of thing, meditation. So those are the spiritual but not religious. Again, these are broad categories, and every single person has their own story. So I'm overgeneralizing here, but hopefully these categories are helpful for thinking about who these people are. The third category are the duns. We don't have to talk about them very much because it's pretty simple. They are done with religion entirely. That's what the duns are. They're done. About a third of the nuns are also duns. And the fourth category that Tony Jones and Ryan Burge identified are zealous atheists. This is about 11% of the nuns, so not a very, very big group. The vast majority of people who've left religion are not actively trying to convert people away from religion, but this group is. This group is what we might call Reddit atheists. If you've been on Reddit at all, if you've looked on some of the Reddit threads at all, you know what I'm talking about. They're the type of people who mock Christians for needing to pray to a sky daddy and for believing in a flying spaghetti monster. There's a lot of stuff like that. The internet can be a really, really dark place. And this group can be more aggressive than many of the other groups, the zealous atheists. Now, if you believe in the God who they are referring to in those ways, it's easy to feel offended, right? It doesn't feel nice to be mocked. That's not something that just we're all lining up to experience. But in the end, when we ask the question, who are the nuns? I think it's pretty simple. We have these sociological categories, but even the nuns that you wouldn't want to meet on Reddit are just like us. They're people to be loved. They're souls to be shepherded. They're stories to be heard. That's who every nun is. They're people. They're made in the image of God. And many of them left not because of hate for the church or for church people, but because of hurt, because they've been hurt by the church, by church people. So they're obviously different from us, and I think that means the challenge for us is to go out of our way to have compassion and humility and curiosity about their stories, about why they've done what they've done. And that especially is important, I think, for something like this, where it is a very one-sided conversation, where I'm behind this pulpit and you are not talking back to me, at least for now, and hopefully you don't start, because that would get really uncomfortable for me. But that's the question. Who are the nuns, really? The second question, why haven't they come back? At least yet. Why haven't they come back? I want to identify three major barriers that, broadly speaking, nuns may relate to. The first is a distrust of institutions. A distrust of institutions. This is very broad in our culture right now. It's much broader than just the nuns, but studies are showing that young Americans are increasingly seeing organized religion, like the church, as judgmental, homophobic, hypocritical, and other words that are related to that. About 67% of unaffiliated adults say that churches are too involved in politics. And about 70% say churches are too concerned with money and power. Thus, traditional churches and churchy type approaches can be off-putting for these people because a lot of them have experienced negative things within church, which would be our second thing. Lifeway, which is a Christendom organization, and some research from July of 2024, they report that just 32% of young people report a high level of, or of people in general, report a high level of trust in the church. And that contrasts sharply with 68% in 1975. And even those numbers feel like they might be, I don't know, it feels like it might have been higher in 1975 and feels like it might be lower now than those numbers. But that's what they found. One last thing under this category. It's interesting, this might be unexpected, but that people with less education and lower income are more likely to leave the church, more likely not to remain affiliated with the church. Only about 3% of Christians with master's degrees leave the church. So it doesn't seem like what's happening is primarily the immediate result of secular education or higher education. It seems like the people who believe in institutions, enough to get a master's degree, are also more likely to believe in the church as an institution. So, maybe deeper than the experiences goes to a distrust of institutions. I also want to mention, I'm drawing on several sources for these numbers, all these percentages and stuff. I didn't want to just have this whole thing be like an academic paper where I just tell you sources repeatedly. So I'd be happy to share those with you if you're interested, or if you Google pretty much any of these, you could find them pretty easily. But second thing I want to talk about, negative experiences as to why they haven't come back. This is about a quarter of the nuns report this, that this is a big part of why they haven't returned to the church. They've had negative experiences. They've experienced conditional acceptance, guilt-driven preaching, manipulative tactics, and hypocrisy, or even outright spiritual abuse. That's what they report. The tragedy of many American churches, you could say of the American church in general, just on a broad spectrum, is that it really hasn't offered, in many cases, much more than what people can get anywhere else, except more shame. That's how a lot of people feel about church, that I go there if I want to feel like I'm not a good person, that I'm failing at life, and that everyone else is better than I am. I hope that that's not the case here, but that's how a lot of people feel about church. They feel that way about evangelism in particular. It's associated, that word, that concept is associated with coercion, with cultural insensitivity. Many nuns immediately withdraw if they feel like they're being forced into commitment. On the other hand, they report being intrigued by Christians who just simply live in a loving community without an agenda, that they just are following Jesus and they want others to do the same. Maybe there's a fine line between those two things. And I think that's an area where it'd be helpful to explore that in real life with someone you know who is unaffiliated with a church. But the third thing I want to mention is busyness. Why haven't they come back? Busyness or convenience. The Great Dechurching is a book that I've relied on for this research. And it says that the number one reason that people leave the church is not abuse or doubt or anger. It's that they moved. They moved away. And of course, there's most likely a church, if they're still in America, there's most likely a church pretty close to where they live. But what happens when you move is that you get disconnected, you build new rhythms, and you feel the quiet pull of convenience. COVID did this for a lot of us without having to pay for a moving truck. We got the experience of the empty Sunday, and that allure of convenience is very powerful in a world that's so busy, that has so many demands on us every single day of every single week. Just the allure of a free Sunday. So the real driver in this case is not antagonism. They're not anti-church. It's just apathy. They don't care about church enough to invest time and effort into it regularly. A month ago now, you might recognize this man. CBS announced that they were canceling his show. This is Stephen Colbert, and he is the host of The Late Show on CBS, or will be for a while at least, till they finish it. But what's interesting about this, there are several interesting things that I'm not going to go into, but what's interesting in part is that this is the most popular late-night television show by far, by viewership. By far, it's the most popular one. And there are lots of ideas as to why it's canceled. But one reason just seems to be that late-night TV is an outdated model at this point. Experts estimate that The Late Show, even though it was incredibly popular by industry standards, was losing about $40 million every year. $40 million every year. And that seems to speak to the idea that the late-night television show is just an outdated model. Now, I bring that up because there's a sociologist named Christian Smith who compares church in America to what late-night TV used to be. Everyone back in the day, everyone is obviously overgeneralizing, but lots of people back in the day watched Letterman or The Tonight Show all at the same time, joined in and watched around the country at the same time. But now, most people, especially younger people, are not sitting down to watch a late night show at midnight on 4 nights a week. They're catching a clip on YouTube or TikTok, or if their favorite celebrity is being interviewed, maybe they tune in for that show. But that's about it. Most of these late night TV shows are not popular among young people. And so the Christian Smith, the sociologist, compares church to that, the experience of church with young people. He says that people used to go to church for their spiritual health. 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, right? Everyone was here. Everyone came and sat in the pew to invest in their spiritual health. But now, spirituality for a lot of people is on demand. It's just binge when you want it. So it's freer. It's not always tied for them to a church building like this one. We have a culture that could be described as Netflix and grind, where you're grinding at work all day, every day, and then when you come home, you just want to relax and watch Netflix and be done with it all. You don't want to have to put up with the world. And in that type of world, church can feel irrelevant and exhausting for some people. In other words, the defining problem is just how American life works in the 21st century. The systems of our world are built to maximize professional achievement as defined by financial success. Individual achievement, aka the money in my bank account, is the goal for a lot of people. We might call that workism It's just the idea that work is the most important thing about life, that work is what will help me to be happy, to feel fulfilled, etc. Workism reigns in our culture, and that leaves precious little time and energy for forms of community like church that don't directly correlate with my financial future or my kids' financial future. Leaves little room for that. So communities, including religious communities, for a lot of people, are like a math problem that doesn't add up. That's what they're finding. They're finding that most people who've left the church haven't lost their faith. About 75% of them as a whole, of the nuns as a whole, still believe pretty much the same things. They're even open to returning to church. They've just drifted. They're busy, they're disconnected, they're disillusioned. They just drifted. They didn't desert in a really active way. They just drifted. Now, it's important. I want to frame this not in a way to say that the nuns are this group of mindless and spineless and lazy people who are just doom scrolling on TikTok until they die. That's not what I'm trying to say, because this group of people, broadly speaking, values things like inclusivity and authenticity and social justice and environmental care, lots of things that they care about. They still believe in things. They just don't believe in us. They don't believe that the church is relevant for the things that they care about in the world. So, many of the nuns are busy, that is true, but almost all of us, no matter how busy we are, can figure out a way to carve out something if we feel like it's beneficial to our lives. And the sad truth is that many of the nuns have perceived or experienced church not as a benefit, but as a burden or just simply as a bore. And that's it. They're busy, and church is not meeting the cut for them. Now, those are three answers as to why they haven't come back. The third category for tonight is the societal impact of the nuns leaving the church, of people being religiously unaffiliated. I'll go as quickly as possible here. The first three things. The first that I want to mention of what this means for society is that it means a hollowing out of our societal structures, a hollowing out of societal structures. I can't spend much time on this like I would prefer, but I wanted to read from Matthew 9:35 and 36, which says that Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like a sheep without a shepherd. Now, I bring that verse up not to say that every nun is harassed and helpless like the sheep without a shepherd in a way that I'm not, but just to say that when we look out at our culture, we don't see a culture, broadly speaking, that knows where it's going, that knows what it values, that knows how to get to where it wants to go. We see a culture that really is questioning, that's wondering, that's divided, and I think in part, it's because we've lost our flocks. For the nuns, we've lost our church families. We've lost our shepherd. We've lost a guiding light for our lives. So, a hollowing out of societal structures. It just takes us out of community. We'll talk more about that with some of these other ones. Second is a weakening of democracy. This is something I debated whether to bring up, but I don't know if it's incredibly relevant for a setting like this, but I think it's relevant enough and interesting enough to talk about briefly. This is a piece in The Atlantic from Jonathan Rauch, who is a secularist, not a Christian. It's from 2003. And he wrote this piece on apatheism, which is a word that he came up with. And basically, it just means that at the time, he believed that it didn't matter whether God existed or not. He didn't care. He didn't care whether religion was true or helpful. He just wanted to live his life and not be bothered by it all. And this piece was entitled Let It Be, was a defense of that perspective, saying that other people should also have that perspective. Well, what's interesting is that now Jonathan Rauch has recently said that this was the dumbest thing that he ever wrote, and he fully rejects this idea now. And I bring this up not to cherry pick the one guy who might agree with me, so this is not meant to be a dunk on someone who might agree with this still, but I think his points are interesting enough to talk about. He now sees Christianity, he's not a Christian still, but he thinks for society, we need the Christian faith. He says that the Christian faith is not just a private spiritual resource. He actually sees it as a load-bearing wall for democracy. He thinks that the founders relied on Christianity to provide things that the Constitution couldn't, that the Christian faith was supposed to supply people a reason to be civil, to be self-restrained, to be honest with each other, values that the Constitution itself can't produce. So he thinks that one reason why morality seems to have been declining in our culture is because of people leaving the Christian faith. And one thing I'll say, again, I wish I could talk for much longer on this, is that I don't think Jonathan Rauch is arguing that we need a Christian civilization so much as he's arguing that we need genuine Christ-likeness. It's not that we need to have a Bible be read before every congressional hearing, I don't know. At least for him, at least for democracy's sake, what he's saying is that we need people who are genuinely like Christ, people who are compassionate and kind and honest and loving and care about what's right in the world, care about doing right, care about their neighbor, care about morality. We need Christ's likeness. Even in places in our culture where values from the Bible, like justice and love and equality, that kind of thing, biblical values are still held on to, what we're finding is that many people who are part of iGen, which loosely defined as ages 12 through 20, people like that are no longer spiritual but not religious. They're neither spiritual nor religious. So in general, our culture has cut off the source of the values that we hold, and now we're also cutting off the values themselves. We're losing the morality that the source, the Bible, provided for us. I wish we could talk about this more. I'm going to keep saying that, but we'll move on to the third thing, a reducing of personal flourishing. This is a result of the Global Flourishing Study, which is a regular study with over 200,000 participants from 22 countries. They found that people who go to religious services at least once a week typically have higher scores in all areas of personal flourishing, particularly happiness, meaning, and relationships. Now, I think that's incredibly important. This is a gigantic study, and it found that these people who attend a religious service at least once a week report higher scores in every level of flourishing. Every category that they're measuring of flourishing is higher in religious people. Maybe one reason for that is that religion in general, and particularly for us, the church, offers these 4 B's, as psychologists of religion call them. The 4 B's. The first B is belonging in the form of social support. The second B is bonding in the form of spiritual connection. The third is behaving in cultivating a character and virtues in us that are taught within religious communities. And the fourth is believing in the form of embracing hope, forgiveness, and shared spiritual convictions. I think the church is maybe more relevant than ever in our society in the sense that I think we can be an antidote to many of the ills that our society faces in a very real life and immediate way. I want to end by reading from Acts chapter 2, verses 41 through 47. Obviously, an incredibly important text for us in particular in churches of Christ. So those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And all came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all, as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number, day by day, those who were being saved. I think this type of community, the type of community that we in the Restoration movement are trying to be, is in many ways the exact type of community that our country, our culture is missing. A community of people who care about each other, who eat together regularly, who generously give to help each other, who help each other move apartments, who help each other when rent is due and there's no money, who help each other when a baby is born, who help each other when they're sick. A community of people who are invested in each other, who look a lot like this one. Now, the catch with this is that this doesn't require less of us. It requires more. A community like this one, where people are actually selling what they have and giving to the people in their community. A community like this one, where people are eating together day by day, regularly, participating in these religious practices together every single day. That doesn't require less of us. It is not an easy win. It requires more, especially in our culture, as we've talked about, our culture of busyness and convenience and workism, where we have different priorities from these people. And this is a temporary situation. This wasn't what they did for the rest of their lives. So, of course, we have to situate this in our time and place. But I think this type of community is exactly what we're all looking for. We're looking for a place to see and be seen, to challenge and be challenged, to love and be loved. That's what our culture is missing, and that's what we can be. But the challenge for us is that it's so much easier. It's so much easier to show up here 1, 2, 4, 6 even hours a week, to show up to this building and do church here, right? So much easier to check in this air-conditioned building, sit in a pew. There are restrooms, there's water, there's food in the back. If you're really hungry, you can go snag something. Probably don't do that, but there's something if you're really, really hungry. It's so much easier to show up here and do that, to do church. It's so much harder to be church. So much harder to actually invest in the people here, to invest in each other in a way where we're eating in each other's homes, where we're not just going home after work and just watching Netflix all night, but where we're doing something. We're investing in something bigger than ourselves. We're investing in something that can make all the difference in my life and in yours and in the lives of our country as a whole. We're becoming radically different sorts of people in a radically different sort of community. We'll talk next time about more things that are practical about what we can do maybe to help the nuns to find a home within the church again. But for tonight, I want to leave you with that challenge, that it's easy to look at the people outside of these walls and say, woe is you, right? It's easy to point at them and to judge them for being nuns. But like my mom used to say, when I do this, I have more fingers pointing back at me than at them, right? And Jesus calls us to that. He calls us to that self-reflection, to say, am I being the type of person that a nun actually wants to go to church with, that a nun actually wants to break bread day by day with, that a nun actually wants to follow Jesus together with? Speaking of that, tonight, Jesus' invitation to follow him is open for you and for me. And if you want to do that publicly tonight, if you want to confess your faith and begin your journey of discipleship with baptism, won't you do it as we stand and sing together?